Over the last year and a half, contact centers have undergone a number of changes, including technology advancements, remote and hybrid working environments, cost cutting, to shifting consumer behaviors and increased customer expectations. As customer centric organizations look to really stabilize business continuity practices, they're forced to rethink new challenges as well as opportunities. But arguably most importantly, the pandemic has shed light on how contact centers handle unpredictable call volume. During certain points of the pandemic, call volume increased drastically while agents became scarce. No longer willing to tolerate waiting on hold or repeating information, consumer preferences changed. In fact, according to CCW Digital Research, 60% of consumers now care more about customer experience when deciding which brands to purchase from. The vast majority will actually switch to a competitor after just one or two poor customer service interactions. And the top two consumer demands that customers judge service on is speed and efficiency and accuracy of information. Challenged with unpredictable call volume spikes and increased labor shortages, what are your options when demand can spike at any given time? How can contact centers remain operationally efficient while delivering customer experience that leads to higher customer satisfaction scores and customer lifetime value metrics? These are some of the questions we hope to answer in today's session. I'm Matt Wujak, CCW Digital Market Research Analyst, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined by an expert on this topic, Sahil Mehta, the VP of Sales and Head of the Customer Organization at Shiftsmart. A little bit about Sahil before we get started. Sahil is responsible for Shiftsmart's global expansion, top-line growth, and customer success. Since joining Shiftsmart, Sahil has had key leadership positions in the areas of business development, client management, and delivery. Prior to joining Shiftsmart, he held roles at both Google, who you'll hear from later in the online event, as well as Mercer. Sahil holds a Bachelor of Science in Industrial Engineering and Management Sciences from Northwestern University. In this session, Sahil and I will cover how shifting labor market dynamics and rising consumer demand is impacting service-oriented businesses, why replacing traditional shifts with fractionalized work schedules leads to better efficiency, the best practices for sourcing and training contact center agents, how to manage unexpected spikes in call volume with confidence, and how to launch a better, faster, and more cost-effective contact center. Sahil, how are you today?
I'm doing really well. Thanks so much for making time to chat with me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And we're very excited to have you and to hear your opinion on some different contact center trends that I know you guys work a lot with at Shiftsmart, as well as us at CCW Digital. So to kick things off, I want to hit on one of the most important topics right now, which is some of the challenges that the contact center has been facing. Obviously, contact centers are under enormous pressure today. Consumer expectations are rising while competition is increasing and technology is advancing. So what are some of those top challenges faced by the contact center industry?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think especially timely issue right now. So there's a great quote by Jeff Bezos where he talks about the best thing about customers is that they're never satisfied. So if you get them 2-day delivery, they expect 1-day delivery. If you get them 1-day delivery, they want it right away. And if you get it to them right away, they want to know why you weren't able to anticipate their needs in advance. And I think similarly, there's been escalating demand from customers to have real-time support when they need it in the moment. And that's become pretty much table stakes for several brands, especially digital first brands in the 21st century that folks are used to interacting with, whether that's on-demand cars, on-demand food delivery, or the like. We think that those types of trends are going to continue to permeate into more traditional legacy businesses, and people will expect those, kind of longer-standing businesses to adopt the practices of the modern world. So whether that's my traditional grocery store should have delivery within 20, 30 minutes, or hey, this e-commerce website for a brand that's been around for 100 years should still be able to deliver me something in 2 days. So on one side of the spectrum, you have customers who are just absolutely more demanding and will continue to chart the path for increased quality of customer experiences. But what that means is that there's also in addition to those increasing demands on the contact center from customers, there's also been a massive shift in labor, and that's a little bit more about what we're focused on here at Shiftsmart. So what you have is that the events of the last 18 months have really accelerated a structural shift in the labor market. One where people were moving from a world of, fixed 40-hour a week, full-time employee type roles into more flexible, call it gig economy roles. At Shiftsmart, one of the things that we've observed from day one is with the launch of the on-demand economy, you did have changes, for example, in things like food delivery or car services, which were perhaps evolutionary changes to already existing services. But for the first time, hourly workers were able to tap into work on an as want basis. They could work when they wanted to. They could start when they want to, stop when they want to, and fit in their shifts around their flexible schedule based on their personal preferences. And that's the trend that we've been betting on. That historically those types of roles started in consumer logistics, but they're spreading to different parts of the enterprise, and the contact center is certainly no exception. So we're seeing this increased demand for flexibility, both in terms of when I work, and now, of course, given the pandemic, where I work. So what we found was that actually between 2014 and 2020, the percentage share of the US workforce by gig economy has doubled from about 17% to 35%. So you're seeing several different trends where workers are responding with a flight to flexibility as they've been furloughed from some of these traditional roles, and they're starting to come back in a way that suits their needs better. And employers are struggling to respond to this because now all of a sudden you have increasing volatile demand that spikes up and spikes down, and a worker base that is harder to control and needs more tooling to forecast.
Incredibly well said. And the labor market is undoubtedly experiencing a number of different trends, whether it's an environmental component or employee preferences and demands for work from home or whatever it might be. But how are some of these changes in the labor market really impacting service oriented brands moving forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. So let's first talk a little bit about what has changed, and then a little bit about what impact that change is having on employers. So from what has changed perspective, of course, COVID changed the game, but several of the changes that were brought upon due to COVID were actually accelerants rather of existing trends as opposed to introduction of new ones. So a couple of things. So we like to break this out into two categories: structural factors and then what we like to call event-driven factors. On the structural factors side, you have U.S. labor participation rate at an all-time low and job openings at an all-time high, which means there's unprecedented job availability, which means there's basically low barriers between switching between employers for individual workers. The second thing, of course, we just spoke about this earlier, is the rise of the gig economy, which has given each worker numerous flexible work alternatives. If you left a role that was rigid and gave you a schedule that you didn't really enjoy, leaving that role, there's actually a lot less risk to do so because you're able to pick up one of several different applications available where you can tap into work and start earning money right away. And also, ultimately, there's been a limited interest in several entry-level jobs by job seekers in the market. They're willing to wait it out to find something that's a better fit for them. And then, of course, from an event-driven perspective, you also have a couple of different factors at play there, with the continuous uncertainty around the reopening of schools. That's impacting parents. The estimate is that roughly 6 million Americans are sitting out of the workforce because of the fact that they have to make sure that their children have adequate childcare. And then, of course, there's still latent fears due to COVID-19 itself. Several frontline workers and folks going back into offices are at risk of exposure, and we're still not sure where we stand in the pandemic in terms of the risk it poses. Those types of things have created this environment where we have 62% labor participation rate. And what we found is one of the industries we work in is leisure and hospitality. 70% of workers who were in that space are no longer looking for work in that industry. So a massive shift is taking place. And what that's done to employers is it's effectively changed the expectations of their workforces, and the options that they've had in the past to address how to manage and build an hourly workforce are just no longer serving them well. So think about how employers have historically tapped into an hourly workforce, or any workforce for that matter. You had effectively three options. You could either build it yourself, which required significant upfront investment of both technology, operations, and recruitment oversight. You could go to a BPO, which was effectively just a cost arbitrage play. They would do the same thing you would do. They would go out and buy the same technology, invest in the same types of recruiters, post to the same job boards, but they might give you a bit of a cost advantage or a discount for letting them handle it instead of you. And then the last option was, temp staffing firms. And with temp staffing firms, the nice thing about those temp staffing firms was that, hey, they offered flexibility. They could be hired in a pinch. And you could get them staffed up to potentially 2 to 5% of your aggregate needs in a relatively short order. Now, the downsides of both of those, of all three of those options, of course, building it internally is extremely expensive and inflexible. Once you've made some of those large scale cost investments, it's really hard to walk back out of them. With the BPO, while you are getting some cost arbitrage, ultimately, even if you're able to mirror metrics, you're not getting a ton of flexibility or the ability to be responsive, more so that you would get with a temp staffing firm, where you can be responsive with a temp staffing firm. You can move up and down, but there's no way to mirror metrics or bring in some of your operational standards to those types of organizations. So, from an employer's perspective, they're doing a lot of different things. If you just saw yesterday, actually, Amazon announced that, hey, we're going to provide college educations to all of our hourly associates. That's not a surprising move. We're seeing several types of these types of moves, whether that's part-time benefits at Chipotle, interview bonuses at McDonald's, retention bonuses from Omni Hotels, childcare from CVS Health. Across the board, employers are willing to try anything to bring people back to the table. But the one thing that they're missing, and it's largely a structural challenge of how they operate and how the traditional vendors in this area have operated, is how do I offer more flexibility? And that's what we've been focused on at Shiftsmart, because we believe that ultimately one of the largest preferences of workers in the modern economy is flexibility. And recently there's been a record high number of female participants in the gig economy, and 80% of women who participate in the gig economy rated flexibility as the most important reason for doing that work.
Obviously, a ton of advantages for the gig economy and flexibility, and employers are obviously smart employers at least are adapting to some of those changes. But everything you talked about more or less has a large impact on the employee experience, which is changing tremendously as well. So, what are the demands of contact center agents specifically in some of these changing situations?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and something that every employer has to consider, because if we're very honest about it, the experience of an hourly associate in the United States has gone to a very transactional place, at least in the way that the companies treat those individual workers. And what we say is happening is that in a lot of cases, these workers are catching up and now returning that transactional view of the world. So how can employers differentiate themselves? There's a few ways, in my opinion. One, honor the desire for flexibility. So let people work where they want, let people work when they want. The next thing is, I think another thing is cloud-based modern tooling. If you're able to tap into all of these really high quality consumer services from your phone, from your laptop, remotely, why shouldn't enterprise tools live at that same place? And then finally, we think a really, really important piece of this is pay people quickly. The 2-week payroll cycle is antiquated for several of these types of roles, where people might be just picking up a few hours here, picking up a few hours there. With advancements in modern financial technology, it should be possible for employers to pay workers fast.
Absolutely. So we already covered a number of very important topics right now in the contact center relating to operational efficiency, the employee experience, the gig economy, cloud technology, benefits of just modernizing your workforce as a whole. But if you had to pick three objectives right now, what are the top three needs of the contact center today?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. So first and foremost is that ability to dynamically spike up and down and serve my customers, right? I need to, if I'm not able to even answer the phone, I'm obviously at a disadvantage with my customers. However, I don't just want to answer that. So I'd say first one is reliability, availability, the idea that, hey, I can meet demand with supply of agents. But supply is not enough. Quality is extremely important. If this is going to be, if customer-centric companies are going to use their contact centers as a way to interface with their customers and potentially drive them to make more purchases or be loyal to that brand, that needs to be an incredible experience, which requires operating standards, KPIs, and quality metrics that need to be mirrored amongst anyone coming into the contact center environment. And with these traditional contact centers having over 100% churn, the question becomes, how do you maintain a high bar of quality without necessarily having to commit to the types of things that don't enable you to be dynamic and flex up and flex down. And then the last piece is of, it's no secret, whether it's through a revenue generation calculation or just through a cost calculation, cost efficacy and economic efficiency overall is extremely important for the contact centers. So there's a lot of different ways you can slice that up, but economics is a huge part of the process.
Absolutely. And earlier, if you remember at the beginning of the session, I mentioned this concept of fractionalized work schedules. Why does replacing traditional shifts with a fractionalized work schedule lead to better efficiency for the contact center overall?
Yeah, it's a great question. So if we channel back to some of the causes of inefficiency in a contact center, first off, with rigid fixed shifts, you're going to have a higher degree of no-shows and call-outs because inevitably, if you're not willing to give your agents flexibility, they're going to take their flexibility. They're not going to show up because they know that, if you choose to not work with them in the future, there are hundreds of thousands of jobs available in their space that they can go get a new job tomorrow. So if that's the case, just a core part of efficiency is actually having the people scheduled show up to their shift. And by offering fractionalized shifts that meet the scheduling flexibility needs of the agent, you inherently are going to drive higher attendance, higher throughput, and higher fill rates ultimately. So that's a pure part of efficiency. Second piece is you'll be able to drive more precise peaks and valleys to mirror inbound call arrival patterns. Like, who says that you have to work 8 hours to be productive? Why can't someone work 4 hours, 3 hours? Or for example, why can't we fractionalize the shift on duty instead of duration where, hey, this person's only trained to get this type of call, which means we can reduce their training time from 6 weeks to 3 days. That's another big challenge that I think contact centers face is this massive lead time to train agents because they need to boil the ocean and train them on every possible use case. Why not fractionalize it on just a subset of duties, train those people fast and get them into work, which enables you to then further segment your high performing agents into more complex use cases.
Yeah, it's interesting because the concept of training agents is actually one of the biggest challenges that contact center leaders are stating they're undergoing right now. But it sounds like we have the necessary technologies and advancements right now to be able to not only scale agents up and down and meet operationally efficient standards and adhere to some of the employee preferences around when they're working, where they're working, but a number of other components as well. So part of that operational efficiency piece is being able to handle volume. So how can contact center managers really handle spikes in volume that might be unexpected at times?
Yeah, so let's talk about how they might do it today. As a way to start. So if I'm a contact center manager or a manager in any sort of hourly environment, and I all of a sudden have a spike of demand, which I now need to go meet, whether that's an actual spike in demand based on something unexpected from the outside of the world, or a manufactured one where, hey, I had too many call outs, therefore my demand is outstripping my supply pretty significantly. In either case, my set of actions are the same. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at my roster and I'm going to go call the people on my list and go say, hey, can you come in and work today? The next thing I might do is, hey, let me go ask the people who are here today to work longer. Next thing I might do is maybe I know a manager from another contact center down the road from my company or another company. I might call them and say, hey, do you have anyone available that could work today? And you could pay them via gift card. That's something we see really commonly. And then finally, if things are getting really desperate day after day, perhaps I'll go tap into a temp staffing firm as a short-term solution and maybe a BPO if it's a long-term systemic issue. But what if we did things a little bit differently? And we think that the approach that we've built and deployed at several large-scale enterprise customers and government agencies can work really well, which is one, let's start by training a larger pool of agents than we need. Because these agents they understand that, hey, this is a flexible role. I may not work at this role every day. Therefore, I just want to be able to train and badge into this role and be available. So let's say, hey, at any given moment, you might need up to 50 agents. Well, you might actually need up to 75 one day if something unexpected happens. Let's go train 100 or 125 to account for things like people not being available or people churning out of the system. So the first thing is to build a large trained pool of agents who you might know based on their previous experience with other customers are a good fit for this role. Once you've built that pool of agents, the next thing is to use data from your call arrival patterns to forecast when you might need people available. And then based on that, you can now dispatch fractionalized shifts for 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours to that large pool of agents and just pull them in for what you need. And another thing that's really powerful that we've enabled with several of our customers is the ability to do surge pricing. So think about this, if supply suddenly is short and demand is high, why can't we just slightly increase the wages and use that as a motivator to drive more people to get started working? And then finally, and I think this is the most important thing, and this is something we've worked with several of our clients on, is that migration to a cloud-based infrastructure. So tools like Five9, UJet, and several others can enable those agents to go from accepting a shift on Shiftsmart to logging into their contact center software and working in just a matter of minutes.
You've already answered this question in a number of different other questions so far, but one of my favorite questions to ask a lot of people that we talk to is, how can you launch a better, faster, and more cost-effective contact center with specifically your company, Shiftsmart?
Yeah, yeah, it's a great question. So for us, the concept that we pioneered is what we call the enterprise labor network, which is designed to be an extension of your existing labor network that just happens to be managed, trained, and deployed by Shiftsmart. So effectively, what we do with our customers is the first thing we'll do when we start working with you is deploy an account team. And their goal is to, one, do the job, learn the job, understand the job, and translate it. So building out highly detailed but very streamlined, fractionalized training materials and a training plan that will enable us to get stood up in many cases under 48 hours in some of our largest customers' cases when they had a really, really urgent need. So that answers the question around faster. Around better, let's make sure that we're measuring operational KPIs on an agent level basis and then looking at the mix of agents across the aggregate pool of people working to ensure that, hey, this is the right mix of people that will deliver us the aggregate metric. So if we know that certain agents hit certain hold time metrics and we want to hit a certain metric, we might say, hey, 75% of agents need to hit at least this threshold, but we're okay with tolerating 25% of agents below that threshold because what they may not have in AHT, they give us in capacity, which enables us to get lower wait times for our customers. So you can start to pull those levers dynamically. And then finally, from a cost-effective perspective, why should you, if you think back to the era of people owning servers, their own servers where, hey, you would forward forecast your needs and you'd say, okay, I have this much, compute and storage needs. I'm going to go buy a server against this. And then companies like GCP, Microsoft with Azure and Amazon AWS, of course, basically pioneered this idea of, hey, why don't we buy several servers, co-locate them, and then you just tap into the computing and storage power on an as-needed basis and only pay for the portions you use and need. This is the same exact concept with Shiftsmart, where we basically enable you to build a large-scale trained pool of workers who are experienced in the contact center in similar use cases and trained specifically to your use cases, dispatch fractionalized shifts on an on-needed basis, tying it to demand so you can flex up and flex down as needed, and then ultimately manage those individuals based on agent level reporting of the skills. And over time, further refining the pool to be offering preferentially shifts to folks who are performing better. So you can say, hey, if people are doing really well, let's give them first access to shifts in the future.
Yeah, I heard you mention that pay for what you use model, which is becoming more important for customer-centric organizations for a number of reasons, but specifically because a lot of contact center executives are focused on cutting costs right now. In fact, CCW Digital Research actually confirms that 66% of contact center leaders are really prioritizing cutting costs and making cost reduction, which is actually the third most important priority right now, only behind customer satisfaction and customer loyalty. So in terms of that pay for what you use model, how does this model cut costs?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think there's two ways that a model like ours actually drives cost savings, or rather economic efficiency to the bottom line of our customers. The first way is there's an inherent, what I like to call almost an efficiency arbitrage by just eliminating unutilized time. So let's move unutilized time into time where it would be utilized. So you might net out having the same aggregate hours, or you may net out having fewer aggregate hours. But either way, you're either getting more bang for your buck, or you're not spending on time that you're not utilized. And I think inherently that consumption-based model, which has been popularized in several different companies, our view of the world is that technology is fractionalizing fixed assets to the unit of consumption. So if you take a look at Airbnb, you don't need to buy a vacation home to go have a vacation home for a week. If you look at Uber, you don't need to buy a car to have a private ride, or you don't need to hire a private driver to have a ride from point A to point B. Very similarly, Shiftsmart for the enterprise is enabling the fractionalization of FTEs, of the historical concept of the FTEs, to the unit of use, which is the shift or the hour. The second way that folks get economic efficiency through our model is ultimately it can be an offset, or rather it can be a way to expand your business. So we have several customers in the contact center space who recognize that they're actually not just having inefficiencies driven from a cost perspective, but they're leaving revenue on the table because they're unable to staff to sufficient levels. So if it's an outbound market research business or a polling business, they may not be able to hire the sufficient staff to deliver for their customers, which means they're leaving revenue on the table. So if you're able to spike up rapidly to hundreds of thousands of hours on a monthly basis, that'll enable you to capture more of those customers, more of that revenue, and ultimately deliver better bottom line EBITDA performance.
Absolutely, and really well said. And that's such a common theme in the contact center, is leaving revenue on the table. Yet there's so many tools, technologies, and strategies to make sure that we're capturing customers, we're enhancing the employee experience, we're being operationally efficient, and we're adhering to the needs of the current market in so many ways that you mentioned. So, Sahil, thanks so much for your time today and your insights as well. But don't go anywhere. We have another session from 2:30 to 3 on the state of customer experience with Genesis Senior Director of Thought Leadership, Claire Beatty, as well as Genesis Senior VP of Content Marketing at Genesis, Janelle Deacon. We'll see you there.